Hello world, I'm Dr. Worthington. I am a double board certified psychiatrist, first in general psychiatry and second in psychosomatic psychiatry. I've been a practicing psychiatrist for about 10 years. My work has really led me to Ketamine Assisted Psychotherapy, which is going to be the focus of this podcast. So generally this podcast is really going to be about contemplating new ideas of healing, new strategies of healing, not about trying to create a fix or trying to find an answer, but really about holding ideas, trying to look at them from different perspectives, and really having breath and space as we talk about ketamine assisted psychotherapy. Hello world, I'm Dr. Worthington. I am a double board certified psychiatrist, first in general psychiatry and second in psychosomatic psychiatry. You may not have heard of psychosomatic psychiatry before, that's okay. It's essentially the field of psychiatry that specializes in the connection between mind and body. So why some physical illness present as mental illnesses and why some mental illnesses present as physical illnesses. So today I would like to focus on why traditional therapy is not enough for some people, okay, why some people may seek therapies such as ketamine assisted psychotherapy. So I think a lot of us, if you're interested in ketamine or interested in therapy, you've probably had therapy before, know somebody who's had therapy. Therapy is a very effective tool. I highly recommend it. I think all of us need a therapist. All of us need a space where we can process and reflect our emotions, where we can really say what's in our mind. I think traditional therapy is really good in sort of getting us to a place where we understand a problem, we understand maybe what happened in our childhood that created certain beliefs that have now created certain patterns that maybe have led to a place of stuckness. However, good therapy will actually take you a step further, not just the why of the problem, but how to change. The problem can become, understanding the why, even knowing why you need to change, why you have a certain problem, and even what you need to do to change, oftentimes is not enough to actually, get people to cross that threshold of change. I think traditional therapy can really become can really fall under the same patterns of behavior of the disease that actually takes us to therapy, right? Which is sort of a kind of blocking that happens from our ego. And by ego, I don't mean sort of ego in the Freudian sense, which is, the id, the ego, the superego, which is intertwined in this idea of the ego, but I mean more the process of domestication. Domestication is essentially the process we go through from birth into young adulthood, which is where your parents more than likely essentially are teaching you the rules of society, how to behave in society, how to become a productive member of society, how to get accepted as a member of the communities that we engage in, and it is very helpful. However, domestication can also drown out the sort of inner voice that we all have, the blueprint that we come into this world with. That really tells us, is something in alignment with me? Is something in alignment with my purpose? Does this, path fit, what I'm here to do? So while domestication, is helpful and necessary in the first part of our lives, it can really become an obstacle to alignment in the latter half of our lives. So I like to think of the first half of our lives as learning the rules. You learn the rules, you learn how to really play by the rules to get ahead, right? And then at some point in your life, you have to sort of decide which of those rules you want to break. So I think sometimes people get stuck in this sort of transition between I know the rules, I'm following the rules, and which of these rules do I need to break to really bring myself into full expression. So therapy can really get us to a place where we understand the rules, right, that we've inherited. We understand the rules that we're playing by. We may even understand how some of these rules might be obstacles. But sometimes traditional therapy doesn't get us to the place where we're deciding and actually breaking the rules that we need to break to get full self-expression. This is where ketamine really becomes a very beautiful tool, because what ketamine does is it really quiets the ego, right? It really quiets those, really entrenched patterns of belief and behaviors that can really keep us stuck. And what I mean by that is, you can sort of think of your brain as, almost like a forest of sorts, right? You have a forest, there are different pathways or different trails in a forest. And some paths are well worn, right? You've walked on the path over and over again, such that it's very defined. You walk on it without even thinking. You enter the forest and you go right because you always go right. Right? But you've never really explored what happens if you go left, right? What happens if you go diagonally? So what ketamine does is it really eases, right, this pattern of belief where you always go right. And you start to think, okay, there's another path possible, and it actually allows you to think, I can walk on these other paths, even though they're not as well worn as the path that I'm used to. In a sense, ketamine allows you to see yourself from a different perspective, right? A different point of view outside of your traditional ego lens. So I like to think of it as a reset for the mind, a reset for the brain. It really becomes a disruptor. And by disrupting your old patterns, you can allow a new pattern to emerge. I also want to make the distinction between ketamine opening up a space and ketamine providing a kind of fix, right? Because ketamine won't fix you, right? It's not going to fix your problems. So when that gate opens or when that window opens and ketamine really helps you open up that space, integration really becomes everything. Integration is what happens between ketamine sessions, right? You can have a really profound experience, you can have really great insights, but without adequate integration, you can't pull those insights into the regular day-to-day egoic world that you live in, which is really the point of the deeper therapy. It's really to create change, right? So we open up that window and then we have integration to really make sense and meaning for what's coming through that window, and really use integration to create a plan that we then execute towards creating change, right? So it's sort of the right hand and the left hand coming together to actually do something in the real world. So I can give an example of traditional therapy really helping with the why. So we can take an example. Let's say you have a guy that comes into therapy, right? He really understands that, maybe he works in a very professional setting and he really is looking for creative outlets. But whenever he thinks about doing something creative, he really gets a lot of anxiety, a lot of panic, right? He really feels like, the activation of panic, taking over him. He might have chest tightness, he might have trouble breathing, he may become sweaty. So he decides, to engage in therapy to really understand, why he's having these reactions whenever he thinks about doing something creative. Let's say he wants to take a dance class, okay? So he sees a therapist and he starts to understand, that he had an experience when he was younger. It could be something from very, very early, like 3 years old, right? It turns out maybe he took tap classes when he was 3 years old. And then he started kindergarten and he was really made fun of, right? Because he's a guy taking dance lessons. From that, he really learned that, art is not safe for him. So whenever he tries to engage in a creative space, his body really feels that activation, right? And you've probably heard of the book called The Body Keeps the Score, right? Our body really stores traumas. So you may not consciously know why you have a reaction to something, but your body knows why, so you feel threatened by something. Right? So the therapist helps him realize that his anxiety has really become a part, right, that comes up for him whenever he tries to engage in therapy. So now he understands the why, right? This negative experience in childhood that really formed this connection to art as not being safe. So now he knows the why, but can he actually, does processing that emotion get to a place where he no longer feels activated by that? Is he really able to allow his inner child to experience art? And this is where traditional therapy can sometimes fall short. He may know the why, right? But whenever he tries to engage in that activity, he may logically understands that art is not unsafe, right? But he may not quite be able to take lessons and experience joy or full expression from that activity. Right. If it's that important to him, or he feels that it's really going to allow him to live his full, authentic life, he may choose to engage in ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And again, this is just an example. I don't believe somebody would use ketamine assisted psychotherapy for this type of example. The trauma would probably have to be deeper, but we'll just follow this through. In a ketamine session, he may actually understand that that pain is not the full story, right? It's just part of the story, but he can actually build out other chapters in that story, right? He can then ask the question, like, who am I as a dancer? Like, who can I become as a creator? He may even be able to connect with the experience of creating art. And that connection, right, the experience of experiencing that in a ketamine session may actually allow him to say, okay, I'm going to book a lesson. Or maybe I'm going to start, taking lessons one-on-one in the comfort of my own home, and then build that sort of level of comfort to take it outside of his home. A really good question that has come up before is, are there other ways of creating a similar disruption that doesn't involve the use of ketamine or other psychotropics? And I would have to say travel. Travel is a really good way to disrupt the sort of default mode network, which is sort of the parts of your brain, the network of neurons in your brain that really allows for self-referential thought. So you can sort of think of it as the part of your brain that holds the stories that you tell yourself about yourself, right? So ketamine disrupts that story. And in disrupting that story, you allow yourself to create other stories, other ways of being, other things you can become. Travel, in a very similar way, does the same thing. Not just traveling for sightseeing, but really going outside of your home country and living outside of your home country, because you leave behind all of the things, places, and ideas that really reinforce the default mode network, that really reinforce the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you came here to do. So in a new space, a new environment, different parts of yourself that may have been dormant can actually wake up, right? You don't have anybody telling you or expecting you to behave a certain way. So you get to really decide like how to react in a certain situation. You really get to decide who you are in that environment. And this is not to say that every environment is going to feel right. Not every environment is going to feel like home. Like you can have, I have been to places, I have to say Montreal is probably, for me, that place where I felt like I really feel aligned in that space, where synchronicities seem to happen. Like you go to certain places and it almost seems like magic, and Montreal was that place for me. For the first time, I really left behind who I was, a Nigerian, zero generation, immigrant. I'm a twin, I'm a middle child. I'm a medical student. Like all of that didn't matter. It didn't exist in that space, right? I actually got involved in art. I started designing clothes. I had a fashion show. I lived a life that was very different from the life I had here. And it really showed me that there's a whole side of who you are that is left to explore if you really allow yourself to pause and say, who am I if I'm not X, Y, Z? And ketamine does something very similar. So if you find that any of these ideas resonate with you, or you would like to explore these ideas more, I invite you to really ask yourself, are there areas of your life where you feel like you're living through the tyranny of the shoulds, right? I should do this, I should do that, as opposed to the truths, right? The truths that really feel in alignment with who you are, and what you understand that you're here to do. So feel free to reach out, ask questions. I'm happy to schedule a call to have a chat. I also want to talk about, other members of my team at Worthington Psychiatry. It's not just me as a solo psychiatrist. I actually work with 2 therapists and a mental health coach. What we essentially do is collaborate in the care of our clients. We try to move people from surviving to thriving. I think general psychiatry, or the way it's practiced in our society, is really focused on symptoms. Like, how do we get people to a place where they're stable, right? They're sort of surviving, but then they really sort of can be dependent, right, on the medication or the therapy, to make them feel better or to tell them what to do or give them the answers. And we really, we stabilize patients, of course, but we try to move patients through a continuum of stable and surviving through, empowered and thriving, right? Which is understanding that they have the answers. They know what's right for them, right? We just really help them, guide them in understanding that there is an internal voice that is always there, that they can hear, and to trust that voice, right? To really it really requires you to be responsible for yourself and your actions. And that's okay. It doesn't mean everything you do is going to be right. There's some things you're going to do that are not going to be right. There are going to be mistakes, there are going to be errors. But in taking responsibility for those, with support, right? You understand that this is what we're here to do. We're here to try things, to fail, to learn, and then to optimize. Like, this is the process of thriving, and we shouldn't shy away from I like to call it the abyss, right? If you really want to create something beautiful, you have to face the abyss, right? And that's okay, because from that emerges something beautiful. And we're here to really just walk alongside you until you get to a place where you feel that you don't really need us anymore. We're essentially trying to get to a place where our clients don't need us anymore. They want to come back and say hi, and we love that, but they don't need us, essentially. So I hope that you're loving what you're hearing. If you love the podcast, please leave us a positive review, leave us a 5-star review, allow other people to find us, allow other people to join us in just doing good work, and just stay tuned for the next podcast. Thank you.